Greetings, Salem Kaiser, and welcome to another edition of Our Awesome Authors. The purpose of our program is to showcase people here in the Salem Kaiser area who have written books or articles that will fascinate and titillate our imaginations. And we're going to get to know them personally one by one and eventually tune in on what they write and why they've written it. So that's what our show is all about. And you're like a fly on the wall. You're listening in on what we're saying and picking up little nuances. And maybe some of you will be inspired at some point to write your own books. So go for it, baby. Go for it. Carol Dare.
Hello, Lee.
Okay, Carol told me as we were previewing the show, she came from a place called Iowa.
Iowa.
But she was only there till the age of 6. Tell us about what Iowa was like in those early childhood days when you were in pinafores and short pants, I guess.
Well, we lived in town. We lived in Lamar's, Iowa, but my 2 older sisters had married farmers. Yes. And our biggest thrill was getting to go and stay at the farm for a while and see the pigs and the chickens and the tall cornfields and all the things that were on the farm. It was a pleasant.
Did you get to milk cows or
I never did learn how to milk a cow. I might have had the opportunity, but I never quite got the hang of it. I had 2 brothers, so they got that job.
They did the heavy work on the farm. Were there any crops on the farm? I know Iowa is known for corn.
Corn. They had the hay and the feed for the cattle and animals. They had to grow all that. Chickens, that kind of thing.
Now you grew up during World War II.
Yes, I did. I was born during the Great Depression, and then during the war we moved to Missouri, where my dad worked for a federal penitentiary there. And it was a lot like Iowa in some ways. They grew a lot of corn.
Yeah, agricultural.
Yes, and we did live, even though he worked in Springfield, we did live on farms around the area, and we still had cows as a sideline. My dad had cows.
Springfield is a fairly big city, I think.
It is a fairly big city.
Not as big as Kansas City or St. Louis, but maybe, 50, 75,000?
It's a nice, I think, a nice little community. Not little, I guess. We lived in Ash Grove and Willard, and if you've ever heard those little places around Springfield.
With them, okay. I just remember that it's farm area, it's kind of flat and rolling hills, and then you have, on one side you have the Missouri River, on the other side the Mississippi River, and some flooding and all. Is that tornado territory also?
There could be bad weather, but during the summertime when it got sultry hot and rain came, it was just so much fun to go running out in the rain to get cooled off. We walked to school. We walked to school maybe 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes you'd see a snake on the country road, and that was not a lot of fun.
Were you scared of those things?
Well, yes, pretty much. They were poisonous. They were poisonous there.
Rattlesnakes?
They weren't. Blue racer, it seemed like, was one of them I heard about.
Not a snakeologist.
Nor am I.
But it all began that way with Adam and Eve and some snake that crawled into their garden, but we won't go into that today. So tell us, you were growing up there. Initially, when you were a little girl, Carol, what was your idea, your fantasy of what you wanted to become when you grew up?
Well, I always liked to read, and I thought I'd like to, from a very early age, I thought I'd like to write, but I got into education and did that for many, many years, writing now and then, and now I'm writing almost full.
You are. You
quite
do
a
a commendable job. Okay. Tell us, what got you into education? What kind of education were you involved in?
Well, my mother was a teacher, and some of my older sisters and brothers were teachers, so it just kind of followed naturally. I had younger brothers and sisters and taught them, so that was a natural.
And what subjects did you teach?
I taught middle school, 7th and 8th grades, and social studies and language arts. So
they're just getting into their follow the leader, who the pecking order, who runs the show, and trying to break free of adult shackles.
Yes, that's a very interesting age. I think a lot of fun.
What was the biggest challenge of teaching, as you recall?
Oh, golly.
Those years. There were probably a few challenges that
I don't know.
I
taught for 4 years, and then I went into school library which was more fun because I got to see all the children in the school, the whole school population, and got to be among books that I liked and
tell us a little bit about the kind of books that you read when you were a student yourself, and what were some of the early influences?
Oh, well, I read Heidi and, Black Beauty and all the classics like that.
Okay. And then what actually motivated you from being a consumer, a reader of books, to a writer of stories and books? What was your motivation?
Well, it was so
there?
much fun to read historical fiction, or even regular fiction for that matter. It just seemed like it would be fun to write, to write it and give that kind of pleasure to someone else if possible. And that was my thinking along the way. Also, when I was growing up, after the war, during the war and after the war, people talked about the Great Depression a lot, and the men would get together and talk about, well, what did you do during the war? Where were you during the war? The war was a big influence even many years afterward, because the men came back with their stories of the war.
Definitely.
And it was just kind of an overriding influence in my life, even though I was too young. When my brothers were little and we lived in Missouri and the invasion started, that's one of the main things I remember, is they were running about the yard. The invasion started. The invasion of Normandy, of course.
Oh, okay.
And
you have to tune in.
I didn't know what the invasion was. I didn't know anything about what it meant.
The
But it
longest
seemed like
stay.
it was a happy thing. Actually, of course, I was too young to realize that people were dying and struggling. And
Have you
and
ever
that it
been
was a
to
horrid
Normandy?
No, I have not. No, I
If
have
somebody could take on a magic carpet, would you accept?
not. Oh, I imagine. Yes, I think it'd be
Okay.
interesting, certainly. I've watched a lot of the recent television programs, documentaries about the
That's how Dwight
D-Day.
Eisenhower really got
Yes.
his reputation way back then. Okay. Tell us a little bit about the Great Depression. I was not alive at the beginning of it, born in 41, just as the war was chugging up, World War II, and I think the war helped to wipe out some of the remnants of the Depression by giving people jobs as soldiers,
Yes.
really. But what was it like where you were in Missouri at the time? or-
Well, my father was out of work. We were still in Iowa while the Depression was on. He was out of work, now and then too, quite a bit.
Yeah.
But then my older sister said, well, everybody was out of work, so, everybody was poor, so it didn't seem so bad.
So what did you do for food then? And
I don't know. I remember one time my older sister said they were just out of everything, and they had one onion left in the kitchen, and she tried to fry that onion up, and they all choked on it. It tasted so awful. She can't stand fried onions to this day. They had windfall apples occasionally that they'd find, but they had other things. And then the welfare office would give out commodities to people who were really hungry. Yeah, that was
No food
that
stamps
was
in
the
those
final.
days.
Well, it was similar to, I guess, but not quite the same. I guess.
okay. What were the prices, example, of a carton of eggs in those days?
Well, they weren't very expensive, of course. I can remember one tale that the woman
10 cents,
told me.
15 cents?
She was talking about going to the store to get a loaf of bread for a nickel.
A nickel.
Now I don't know
That was
which.
big
I don't know
money then.
I don't know what year that
That was
was
big
or anything.
money.
But yes, it was. Things were pretty cheap, but then if you didn't have any money, it didn't matter.
Right. So it was a struggle.
Yes, it was a struggle.
But were you able to maintain a sense of balance of
Well, that's why.
upbeat thing? You weren't drawn down into a emotional depression very much.
Well,
You coped.
by the time I was old enough to really notice things, the war had started and the economy had, of course, picked up because of all the preparation for war, the munitions and all that. So I didn't feel it as much as my older sisters and brothers did, and everybody that I knew talked about it.
Tell us a little bit before we get into the World War II experience. How large a family did you have, Carol?
I came from a family of 11.
Man, that's pretty big.
Yes.
That's
but
more than a baseball team, which is 9.
It had its pleasures.
And where
Yeah.
did you fit into the batting order?
Well, there were 3 younger than me, so I was really one of the younger ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the generation that came before us, they were the greatest generation, really, because they lived through that Depression. And then they went off to war and lived through all of that.
Mm-hmm.
They really are to be admired, I think.
Okay, good. And tell us what got you into writing this book you have called When the World Wept. I will show it to our viewers at home. Here's how it looks. Barbed wire fence, and I guess that implies a concentration camp of sorts.
Yes, in the depths of the Great
Carol
War.
Albrecht Dare, D-A-R-E, like Virginia Dare, the first baby born in Virginia.
Yes.
My father used to have a wine called Virginia Dare.
Oh, yes.
He was in the wine business. Yeah. So tell us about the transition. The war erupted. You didn't write this book immediately. This is after the fact.
No, I just heard. I had relatives who were in the war. I had a cousin, much older than I, who was a fighter pilot, and he went down and died during the war. I had an aunt who was a nurse in the Pacific. I've got her dog tag here. Brought it today. It gives her name, her number, and then her sister, who is the
Let's explain
the person to contact.
Carol, can we explain what a dog tag is and purpose it served? Because in this day and age, I'm not sure if we still have dog tags.
Well, they wore them around their necks, I believe, and there were 2 of them.
Let's do a close-up for the
Yeah,
camera people
all right.
here. Okay, here we go. Dog tag 101. Wherever you're shooting, okay. Thank you.
And when somebody was missing or found on the field, they took one copy, one of the dog tags, to show that this person had died, and left one with the body so that could be identified when they buried the person or sent him
ID
home
purposes,
or whatever
yeah.
they did.
Okay. Where did you get the idea for the content of your book?
Well, I've just always been interested in that period because, as I told you, because all my older brothers and sisters talked about what they were doing during the war, what somebody was doing during the war, and I had an older friend. She's dead now, but she had been a nurse and had gone over, and she told us a lot of her experiences, and I wrote a lot of them are included in the book.
Where did your friend serve?
She served in England. And was in a hospital near near Dover, the coast of there.
Yeah,
and
that's a
so,
seaport where they go across
right. And
the channel.
when the D-Day started, they served about 1,000 men right in their own hospital. Mostly, I imagine it's mostly men. Before the day was out, and of course that continued for many, many days. They served a lot of people. About 250 of them served all these sick people who came in, shipped over,
Tremendous.
returned by ship as they were wounded.
Did your friend come back with a sense of greater compassion or anguish or
Well, of course,
bittersweet?
I knew her in her later years, and she was a very happy person. So
So
she
survived that
recovered from
emotionally.
her horror of seeing all these wounded people. And
It's interesting how different experiences in life tend to leave their impact, sometimes a lasting impact, but also molds our character, and I think that's all to
there
the
were
degree
thousands of
to overcome
women.
a challenge.
There were thousands of women who volunteered for the war, and all of
Waves and the wax and the
and nurses too, and then they volunteered to go overseas. So none of them were drafted. That was all volunteer. To be in the combat zone was all volunteer. There were something like 200 nurses who died serving during the war. 16 of them as a result of direct enemy action. The others were probably accidents or illness or something like that.
Maybe during the next Memorial Day, we could pay special tribute to the nurses who died during
That
wartime.
would be a good idea.
I don't think if Colin Powell and the people are listening to this program, doubtlessly they're fixed to their television and doing that right now.
Yes.
Pass this along to the top brass in the Pentagon and get it going for Memorial Day 2015. Okay, let's get a taste of your literary style and close our eyes and pretend that we're there. So, Carol, would you please
read some from the book?
Read an excerpt so
well,
we can...
this is historical fiction, so I've taken all the research I've done and the stories that I've told and made a fictional story with a fictional character in it, and her name is Alice. And so I'll just start at the beginning during the Great Depression.
Okay.
Chapter 1, Juniper, Oregon, 1932.
Okay. And please remember, as you read, look into the camera occasionally, because our readers there at home want to see your pretty eyes.
Okay. Well, Alice felt a gnawing in the pit of her stomach after the noon break. Though she'd had water and slices of windfall apples that dropped on the road, it was not enough to quiet her hunger pangs.
Yes.
The younger children and her mother, expecting another child, needed milk in the house. Alice refused it. She hungered for the smooth drink, but there was nothing else to eat. Her mouth watered as she watched June finish a banana on the playground right before the school bell rang. All afternoon she dreaded her errand. It was up to her. Mother had the youngsters to look after. Dad was off looking for work in California. He told his family, if I can't find work in California, I'll ride the rails to Washington and I'll march for the bonus army. What's the bonus army, Dad? Emma asked, looking up from the worn copy of Heidi that she read to little Jenny. They're veterans promised extra cash on their service in the Great War. We need the money now. John Bauer polished and buffed his shoes as he talked. It was up to Alice. The family depended on her. With a worried look on her face, her mother had explained to Alice what she must do. At age 12, Alice felt the family's deep shame as she listened to her mother. She had heard about poverty. Her family's dirt poor, Jean had said to her classmates as they talked about a girl they all knew, dismissing her from further conversation. After the dismissal bell rang, Alice lingered behind the other children, shuffling papers, pretending to straighten her desk. If she waited until they all went home, no one would see where she went. When she finally arrived at the building, she cringed to see some classmates from school hanging around nearby, chatting and laughing. The boys jostled and punched each other. Alice stopped and gazed in a store window. Time dragged. When the children noticed her, they walked her way. What are all those dirty spots on your face, Alice? One boy asked, referring to her freckles. June, her blonde curls swinging, smiled. Hi, Alice. I've admired your dress so often. Got something to do around here? Are you headed for this building, Alice? Merle asked. My folks say the Bowers are poor as church mice, June said to the others. Their children will never amount to anything. Alice's face burned with shame. Saying nothing, she walked away and continued all around the block. They were still there when she rounded the last corner. Mother would be waiting for her. The office might close. Shoulders straight, she held her head high and walked past the children as they chided and insulted her. She felt more miserable than she'd ever felt in her young life when she entered the relief office to ask for agricultural commodities. They were still there when she came out with her arms full. She heard them snicker behind her back as she walked away.
Wonderful. Yeah. I like how you go into developing the characters, partly by dialogue and all. Do you have a certain formula that you follow, Carol?
No, I really don't have much of a formula. I try to make them personalities that the person can identify with and make them a little different all the way.
Do you have people in mind from your real life that you use as sort of role models, and then you build on them and that kind of thing?
Yes, I do. I do.
So it's sort of, fiction is sometimes built on true actuality, and then you kind of dress it up a little bit.
Dress it up with a characterization and a particular personality. One of the nurses in the story is rather sarcastic. Another one's rather...
You know people like that in real life.
Another one is,
all my people
is an organizer, and she becomes the head of the hospital, head of the nurses.
And you have some romance interwoven in there,
yes,
and
there
some
has
financial
to be.
stress.
There has to be a romance. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
of course.
Definitely. Okay. So now, did you self-publish or did you get an agent?
Self-published. It's
Okay.
self-published.
Let's tell the people at home, in case anybody aspires to be an author. like Carol. How do you go about self-publishing?
Well, there's
how does it
several.
work?
There are several companies that do that now on the internet. The one I went with was Create Space. It's sort of a subsidiary of Amazon.com, and the book can be ordered through Amazon.com. But I'll be selling and signing books at the State Fair and other places around town.
Okay, hear that, all? State Fair coming up. What is that at the end of August, I think?
Yes, during the Labor Day weekend.
So look at Carol's face. I want you to recognize her when she's at the author's table there under the big tent. I think it's now called the something Craft Center, AmeriCraft or whatever. They have a new name, and because a new sponsor, so they pay for that name presumably. And you'll be signing things, and you'll say, "Hey, I saw you on television, Carol." And now I see you in the flesh. You're a real person. You're not just a television personality there. Okay, next up, Hollywood. Not ready for that?
I don't think so. It was a lot of fun to write.
Why don't you read the book jacket? Because that will
Well,
give
a
people an
child of
idea.
the Great Depression, Alice Bauer, the main character, seeks training as a nurse in order to help patients and to gain a steady job in a hospital. But when World War II explodes, all plans and lives are changed.
Good. Now, you yourself had a career as a nurse.
No,
No,
as
you
a school teacher. I was
You were
a school
never a
teacher.
nurse, okay.
My aunt was a nurse,
Your aunt
so
was a
I've
nurse.
taken, and I had friends who were
Okay.
nurses.
Did you actually go to interview or take notes from your aunt, the nurse, that gave you a sort of a backdrop to
Oh
write the
yes, in
story?
fact, I've included some of the letters she sent while she was in the service to my folks, and this friend that I was telling you about who told me a lot about it. I got many notes from her, how they went to Camp Roberts and what it was like there, and how they had to travel across the country by train, then to catch to go over on the Queen Mary to England, and they had about 4 different stops in England before they finally got to their final hospital assignment in the south of England, so they'd be ready for the victims of the
Good.
Normandy invasion.
That's a super idea, Carol. And I think our audience, including myself, part of the audience, can benefit from what you just say. If you're thinking of writing a book that's fiction or semi-fictional, go around and look for your friends and relatives who've had some similar experiences that you intend to incorporate in that book. Take notes. If you're not much of a writer, you could probably get permission to tape record them and use that as your background, as your foundation, as you build up your characters.
Exactly.
And do that as a kind of building block, really. That's the way you go. Is it more difficult to write fiction or nonfiction, would you say?
Well, I don't know. Fiction's more fun, I think, because with fiction you can make up a town using other towns as models, but you can combine several towns and you can make a person and combine traits from several people you know.
Okay. I have not published a fiction book. I've done a book of essays back in 1999. But I have an idea, a childhood idea. Nobody better steal it from the television here, or I'm going to zap them with a lawsuit. Not really. But the idea I evolved as a teenager was that it was during the Cold War, and it was a day of fallout shelters. Take cover and then fallout shelter. And this happens on a Monday in Macy's department store, and you have different people from different ethnicities who are very prejudiced against other people. The black person has had a history of slavery in his family. The Hispanic doesn't like how the accent is being teased and taunted. The Italian wants to disassociate with the stereotype of all my relatives are in the mafia. The Irish gentleman doesn't like to be characterized as a chronic drinker. The Jewish person doesn't want to be taunted or stereotyped as somebody who is very arrogant and is only into making money. And it goes on and on. And what happens in this story to be, probably called Prejudice in the Cellar, is that an attack takes place. They're all herded into the shelter in the Macy's department store, Manhattan, and they have to learn to subdue all their prejudices, and they have to work as a team to get together because when they get out of the shifter, they're the only people who survived in New York City, and they have no choice but to
Yeah.
bury their differences, or they're going to get buried. So that's my future story, Prejudice in the Cellar. And it may be a bestseller, or it may get down lower than a seller.
Well,
But that's what we're talking about. What advice do you have for future authors from your own experience? How would you begin?
well, I
Carol?
have a lot of friends who say, "Oh, I'm going to get started on my memoirs. I've got some stories to tell. One of these days, I'm going to get out those few notes I took. One of these days, I'll do this or that." You get started. Unless you get started, you can't go anywhere. If you work on it sometime during the day, then you'll think about it the rest of the day, and you'll come up with ideas when you don't even realize it. While you're waiting for sleep to come, there'll be an idea. Oh, I've got just the thing to solve that plot problem.
Yes. Okay.
And working at it steadily is also important. At least 2 or 3 hours a day, or you'll never get anything done.
Good. If anybody out there wants to collaborate on a future memoirs, I'm available. You could call the station and get in touch with me through the station, Lee Coyne, or you could email, if you're into emails, LuckyCoyne, Lucky Coyne, nickname, @yahoo.com, and I'll be happy to work with you as a collaborator, if not a provocateur of sorts and all. Well, any closing remarks for people in the older generation to preserve their memories before they get too sick?
Well, yes,
To
I
do
think we've all
otherwise.
got stories to tell, stories that nobody else has, and you can get started on them. If you even if you think nobody else is interested, I will guarantee you that somewhere along the line a grandchild or a great-grandchild or a great-great-grandchild might be interested in what life was like during your time.
Family history.
Yes.
Somewhat like the Native American medicine man. They probably have medicine women in these days,
Yes.
but that's how we kind of grew up. Okay. Well, anyway, this is Lee Coyne thanking you for tuning in to our series, Our Awesome Authors. We will probably be having a sequel once every 2 weeks. And if you have any authors you'd like to send our way, we will embrace them. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great summer. And it's going to be a hot time in the Old Town tonight. Thank you. See you soon. Bye for now.